All right, so I'm going to get started even as we are stretching, just so that we stay on our timetable today. So my name is Nicole Koester. You probably saw my name on the emails that came out. And first I want to, again, thank you for coming. I know your time is very valuable and very precious, and but more importantly, not only for coming, but for caring about the topic today. I come from the background as a journalist. I was in broadcast for quite a while, and the deeper that I delve into this topic, I become a little hesitant, actually. You know, we're used to the facts. Just tell me, right or wrong, black and white, what can I say, what can I do? That's how I work. And this is not a topic, and for the next 30-ish minutes, that I can give you factual content that I can say this is exactly how to do it, and it's gonna stay this way for the rest of your career. So today I'm going to talk about the conversation in the United States of disability terminology and language, and try to explain that, where we've been, where we are, and maybe even start to foreshadow a little bit into where we're going. So let me start with my slides. This quote, very powerful. Until we learn to appreciate the power of language and the importance of using it responsibly, we will continue to produce negative social consequences for those victimized by dangerous language habits. I don't need to stand here and certainly preach to you. You are the best of the best. We know that words are very powerful by the nature of your jobs and maybe even personal experiences. As the program manager at the NCDJ, we are not here to police and tell you you're doing it wrong. We are a resource. Our goal is to provide information, relevant information, to stay at the forefront of this conversation so that you can come to us and we can provide you some context, some guidance on mainly terminology is what we deal with. But we also would love to see more disability stories being done across the board. So we're not here to scare you away, but or again, to police you, but to help guide your steps. Everyone has to have a why. So I teach broadcast here at ASU, and I'm always telling my students, you need to find a person to build your story around who represents that issue in a larger context. I have a couple students even in the room, and she's nodding. Yes, I like drill that home. People remember people. And this is my why. This is why I care about this topic. This is my sister. Do I look like her? A little bit? So she passed away 2 years ago, very unexpectedly. And I'll just, since we have an extra minute, I'll tell you, another sister, I have a handful of them, went to visit her. She was staying at my parents' home. They were in town visiting my young son for his birthday party, and we got a call that my sister came over to bring her dinner and found her dead on the floor. And my dad was a police officer, a police detective, and certainly made all the phone calls to find out what happened. I'm a journalist. I wanted to know what happened. And despite our best efforts, it's unconclusive. 2.5 years later, we don't know. I bring that up because my sister was diagnosed with depression at a very early age. And I would not, by any stretch of the imagination, say that she died because she had depression. But what I do know, and is factual, is that the way that she felt that she was represented in society was very challenging to her. It was very stigmatizing to her. And do I think that that was some cause and effect? I don't know. I'm not a doctor, but I do feel like she internalized a lot of that negativity that she felt by the way that she knew that her mental disability was being perceived. So I stand here today because I want to be part of the conversation. I want to understand these words better, not only in her honor, but as a journalist. What can we do to be more inclusive, to be more neutralizing, so that individuals like my sister, although her disability proved to be challenging in her life, she went on to have a great job, raised 2 beautiful children. She had a good life, but that she could be felt that she was part of the conversation. So, as journalists and members of PR, speaking a little bit to the choir here, but as Jennifer and our panelists mentioned, it's our responsibility to use relevant disability terms that are accurate, objective, fair, neutral, respectful, and inclusive. That is the goal today. So that becomes a little complicated when we're dealing with this population of people who don't agree on how they want to be spoken of or referenced. This was a quote that I found by a popular blogger. Are we handicapped or disabled? Are we disabled people, people with a disability, differently abled, or special needs? It becomes very much in flux. How can we do a great job if we don't know which words to choose? I know the term has already come up, monolithic. This is not a monolithic group, nor are there very many groups that are monolithic that we can speak to, but looking at some of these graphics, Handicap International, we know ARC, that used to be the Association for Retarded Citizens. That's no longer what that acronym stands for. The Deaf and Hard of Hearing, that's a group that has really unified in their terminology. Special Olympics is still a commonplace, although the word special now is a word that we have some more context to. Autism, a group that really works with identity first language, and we'll talk about that in a moment. So before I can tell you what the NCDJ recommends, let's see where language has been and give you some context and some history. Did I turn it off? Hold on. Button. I'm waving. Hold on. I thought I just pushed forward or back. Is there a way to bring this back up? Let's see. Let me know if I push something on here. I can sing, I can dance. All right, we'll reload it. Well, what's coming up? So previous to the 1960s, there were some terms that were used quite frequently, and some of those terms would be imbecile, moron, retarded. Not only were they commonplace in daily conversation, it was also found in a lot of legal language as well. So in the 1960s and moving into the 1970s, we started to have this rise of the civil rights movement, and the disabled population began to gather, to unify. And that was the first time in between 1970 and 1980s that we started to see the word handicap being replaced by the phrase disabled, people with disabilities, having mental disabilities. In the I'm going off the thoughts since I don't have it right in front of me, but in the 1980s, as we started to gather even more momentum behind this terminology decisions, what are we going to be called? There was a group that, it was called the Capital Crawl, was the term. I have some, let's see if we can jump up to the next one. Well, we'll get there in a second. But this was right before we had the Americans with Disabilities Act passed. And it was a group of about 60 people who had varying types of disabilities who crawled up the steps at the US Capitol to say, we want a voice. And with this voice, we want to tell you what we want to be called. It was in, I want to say the 26th, but we'll wait for the slide. But shortly after that same summer in 1990, when the Americans with Disabilities Act was put into place, George W.H. Bush signed that into place. There we go. Let's see if I can click. Now you can check my facts. I get it all? All right, so here we go. Capitol Crawl, 1990. So July 26th is when the Americans with Disabilities Act was passed. Back up. So in 2009, a popular campaign was called Spread the Word to End the Word. And this was a social media campaign, primarily started on Facebook. And I took this screenshot just the other day. So current online pledges, 774,220. And this is the idea that the word retarded should no longer be used at all. So not only do we recommend that, but this is really where the momentum for that change started. In 2010, it brings us up to Rosa's Law, signed by President Obama. This young girl, I'll tell you a little bit about her. So she had an IEP, which stands for an Individualized Educational Plan. That's how the school system in our state and many other states, that's the terminology they use for the reports or the programming that they provide for students who need some assistance. And her mom went to a meeting, and her daughter was young in elementary school for an IEP meeting, and she noticed that the paperwork had been changed to say a person with a disability to having the term mental retardation on the form. And the mom was highly offended, as you can imagine. And so her young daughter, named Rosa, became the poster child for this change. They started to work with their legislatures, they started to work with their policy advocates, that this was not okay in legal documents to still be using the word retarded in this day and age. So once it was passed, this is the first time that we saw it legally where mental retardation has now been replaced with intellectual disability on the federal, health, labor, and education statutes. And some states you'll find, I've noticed in news, are still kind of catching up to this law. So you may still see them, but it's deferring back to this case right here. Am I pointing right, wrong? I'm stuck. You're my witness, I'm pushing. Is there a way to flip this slide forward? Okay, thank you. All right, well, I'll tell you where we're going from here. We're gonna talk about people first versus identity first. You've heard the term, you may already be aware of it, but let's go in a little bit deeper. So people first language, that is the idea that the person comes before the disability, that the person's identity is more important to reference before bringing up their disability. So frequently you'll hear people with disabilities, yes. A person with an intellectual disability versus mentally disabled, a person with epilepsy versus an epileptic. The NCDJ, this is what we recommend. It is thought to be a more respectful and a starting ground. People might tell you when you ask them, this is not how they want to be referenced. But we recommend starting here with people first language. Sometimes it's a challenge in headlines to always have people first because it's a word count, we're trying to be catchy, grab attention. So sometimes you may see an article where the body of the article has people first language, but the actual headline will switch and have identity first language. Here is a headline where they have kept it people first, where it's saying adults with disabilities. And side note, this was one of our winners for our disability reporting contest. It was a great story. The person behind the social media push for people first is a lady by the name of Kathy Snow. By raise of hands, is anyone, or nod? I won't put you on the spot. I won't ask you any questions. So she has a son at 4 months old who was born with cerebral palsy. And she really felt that his identity as her son, as we've heard from some of our panelists, was more important than his disability. So her blog that she writes is called Disability is Natural. And this was an article that is quoted several times, and her quotes are, they are people, moms and dads, sons and daughters, employees and employers, friends and neighbors, students and teachers, scientists, reporters, doctors, actors, presidents, and more. People with disability are people first. So that is her really her platform that a lot of people have gathered around. These are the groups who use people first language or recommend people first language. So certainly the NCDJ does, the American Association of People with Disabilities, the National Council on Independent Living, the ARC, American Medical Association, and thus down. As journalists, we often are quoting our sources, and if you are quoting these sources, people first language is what they recommend, so let's follow what our source recommends in that situation. Identity first is now starting to pick up steam. So as we talk about where is this conversation now, people first has been the big push, but there are subtle now organized groups that are starting to unite around identity first language. One of those groups is our individuals who have autism, but the autistic group. That one is really in flux on people within that community on what they select. So I would make a note for your PR work or your journalism work that if you are covering someone in the autistic community, definitely ask, because there is not a cohesive census in that group. So this would be like saying, again, autistic woman. Also, the deaf community has also been able to create a much more unified terminology and language that they prefer than some other groups. So frequently, they also will use identity first language. And here's an example of that. So thousands of disabled workers instead of workers with a disability, identity first. Again, quite recently, Lawrence Carter Long on social media had a big push to say the word was the hashtag. We are disabled. Let's own it. Let's claim it. Let's take it back and have more agreement on who we are as a group so that we are more powerful as we lobby and we work for political change that we would like to see in our environment. So this has started to gather a lot more momentum. Again, this was the post in 2000, about 2 years ago. You'll frequently see comments like this on Twitter. I know somebody made a comment about take to Twitter and you can shame someone on Twitter. We know, maybe that's why we get a little fearful, is if we don't do it right, are we going to get blasted from one side or the other? And on these topics where there is not a black and white, we can't go back to the facts and say, this is how you do it, and I am right. Here was one. I understand that you're trying to be on our side, but most of us do prefer autistic person, because with autism makes it sound like autism is a disease or a tumor or a bad thing. The idea that a lot of proponents of identity first will reference back to is you don't say you are a cancerous person. You are someone with cancer. So why would you say I am someone with a disability, that I could separate myself from my disability any more than I could separate myself from being a woman? So that is the argument behind that, is it is part of who I am. I own it. It has molded and shaped who I am, and I'm proud of it. And I wouldn't want to say people first, people who support people first language don't feel that they're proud of their disability either. But just know what's very interesting, and I know Amy Silverman, who has worked her heart out on the updates for the style guide, sometimes the same argument is used on both sides to support their argument, which is kind of interesting. So we know Nell's on a chalkboard, but another term that we're hoping will fade away is the idea of someone being wheelchair bound. This is personally, I am not bound by my wheelchair. It is a very liberating device that allows me to work, play, maintain a household, connect with family and friends, and have a life. Who are we to pass any type of judgment about how bound someone or confined someone is to something? I liked that statement. This was popular in the spring, as many of you know. People are still struggling with these words. We see the idea of overcame a disability several times. Many people will jump on you on social media if they see the term overcame a disability, to think, why do I need to overcome something that is part of me? It's not something that I need to separate from who I am. So don't use terms that say he overcame his disease. Another word would be the term sufferer. that he was suffering. Many times we have quotes from Hawking that talk about how he really embraced his disability. He didn't feel that he was suffering. So that brings us up to the NCDJ guide. So it's in your packet, so go ahead and bring it out. Because besides working with the NCDJ, I teach, and we as professors like to give quizzes. I know, you're so excited. But no better way to test your knowledge than to give you a little quiz and to let you interact with those at your table. You're so quiet, but you're such a great group of people. And I'm sure you have some friends or would like to make some friends in this industry, so this is a good time to get to know them. Let me talk about the style guide briefly here. So the style guide that you have is our current style guide, and in the very near future, we will be updating the style guide as well. What we have done with the style guide, so what you have is the older version, new version coming, but this is some of the new version. So Amy Silverman, can you wave? We need to give her a bunch of credit, who has spent hours and hours. Yeah, I know, I'm like, bow down to her. She has spent numerous hours going through each of the terms in the style guide and bringing in some historical context, bringing it up to date, and providing you with the recommendation. Most of what you find in the NCDJ guide is not in the AP guide. So for instance, this is Amy's insert, or will be her update on the word cripple. So the cripple word, most of us hear that and think, oh, I wouldn't ever use that term. But know that there are some groups who are now trying to own that word once again. So there is a group that has Cripple Magazine. There is, they do use the asterisk, but, so Chris Brown, another person here, so we have one group who is using it as the title of their magazine, taking ownership. Then we have Brown here, who is a writer and a disability advocate, who is saying, if I see the word, I'm going to absolutely ignore the context, regardless of what it's saying. So our recommendation frequently, as you have heard, is start with people first language. If it is a word that could be polarizing in any way, shape, or form, please go to whoever you're interviewing and ask them. Just say, how do you like to be referenced? You never know, they might be part of Crip the Vote. You may have seen that hashtag, that is a popular hashtag. Maybe that's the way they want to be referenced. So if that's the way they ask to do, ask and ye shall receive. Another term is differently abled. So this started to come into the conversation in the 1990s. It never truly caught on as much as the terms people with disabilities or person with a disability. As Amy has mentioned, this was possibly a way where somebody is kind of, it almost would sound like that they're not embracing, or they're kind of trying to avoid talking about disability. So again, our recommendation is person with a disability. It's not addressed in the AP. Survival and battle. So with John McCain passing away not too long ago, just a couple weeks ago, there were references to surviving his cancer or battling his cancer. The terminology battle may have been popular because of his history and background. There was some backlash to that in the conversation. And when I'm talking about conversation, most of the time that's kind of a social media type conversation is where a lot of this this backlash, I hate to say it, but sometimes you kind of get beat up on Twitter if people don't agree with you. I have found, and you can nod at me if you agree, but if you don't hear from people on social media, they're probably okay with what you're doing. Most of the time, they come at you when they don't think you've done it right. So that's where a lot of these conversations happen. You will still see it. We recommend just be aware that the context and the connotation of using that term. Is there a better way to say it and keep it more neutral, more objective, and more fair? Special needs, It was popular in the early 20th century. Now, special needs really tends to be an educational term. So, special education you may still hear from members who work for a school district or teachers. A lot of times now, those forms are called IEPs, the individualized education plans. They don't call them like a special needs program for a child. So special tends to fall now into the realm of more describing educational services than actually being used as a term we would describe someone. So the big takeaway, again, if you are in doubt, please ask, get it from the source, and do the best that you can. Most people would rather you do the story, and even if the selection of terms may not be something that they agree with, they would much rather the stories be done and told than to be so concerned or conscientious of making a wrong choice that we just forego doing any disability stories. Amy touched on this, making it relevant about the story with the airplanes flying over her home. Was it relevant that her disability was brought into the story? So at the NCDJ, we hear a lot of complaints and concerns that if their disabilities were used in the story, it was not relevant, or vice versa, there are stories about the general population and no one with disabilities is included in the article or the press release or the event. So these are pretty clear, where if somebody is blind and they're hiking up, say, Camelback, and they get stranded, is that part of the story? It certainly could be. It would take a little bit more research, asking some questions to find out, is that pertinent to the story? Did it come into play? Was that part of the cause of somebody being stranded? Or was it not relevant at all? So we're going to take a quiz. So here's what I want you to do. So fun. I'm even going to walk around you, right? So in your packet, because we took so much time to stuff these for you, I want you to use them. I want you to open it up. I want you to find your quiz. I want you to make a friend at your table, preferably somebody you don't know. Come on, be brave. I'm used to talking in front of students, and I'm kind of the boss, and in this room, I told my husband, I'm like, this could be a really intimidating group. Like, I'm not your boss at all. I'm not even your professor. I can't even give you a grade. And it's been a long time since I've had to hold the microphone and do presentations to my peers. I want you to look through and go ahead and fill out the quiz. And you can work together. You have a few minutes. And then I will give you the answers. And yes, if somebody knows all the answers, let somebody think, do the work. And then after the quiz, if you have a few questions, I'll try to answer those, and then we get a break. All right, anybody need more time? Nobody want, okay. Well, let's go ahead and I'll give you some answers since I know you're ready for a break. I think I'm gonna come around the tables and put you on the spot because I have taken the stage for long enough. So we'll come over here. No pressure. All right, so number one. This is the most neutral way to describe someone who does not have a disability. Is it A, able body, B, healthy, C, non-disabled, D, normal, or E, unafflicted? Tim?
C.
Yes, C is the answer, non-disabled. All right, you're welcome. Tim's like, okay, I'm coming over here. Don't come here. Number two, to describe someone as a person with a disability rather than a disabled person is to use this kind of language. Let me see your name tag. Kara, give us the answer.
B, people first language.
Correct. Ding, ding, ding. You win extra muffins. Okay. Can take them home. Number 3, what is the recommended term when describing a designated parking space for someone with disabilities? This is a new one we added. What do you think it is? Shireen. See, I had to ask her name. We ask. See? Okay. What do you think?
I think C, accessible.
Accessible. And where this came from, actually, Sarah and I did some research. There was not any state information that we could find, and so we went to the Pacific region that oversees kind of disability policy, and they use the term accessible. So that's what we are going to go with, is accessible. All right, let's come to number 4. This term is recommended when describing someone who has experienced loss of sight. A, blind, B, legally blind, C, limited vision, D, partially blind, or any of these may be acceptable. Let's see, Laura.
E.
E, right? Is that what you were always told? Whenever you have all the above, you just mark it. And it's right. It's right in this case. All of the above. You got the points. All right, number 5. This term is considered offensive by many in the deaf community. A, deaf, hard of hearing, hearing impaired, hearing loss, or partially deaf. Kirthi was a former student, so I'm going to come to her on my quiz. B. You know what? Actually, C. Oh, you've got to come back and visit me. Just kidding. You had B too, and I would say that there could be some on that too, hard of hearing. As you saw in the graphic, there are some groups that specifically use hard of hearing as their titles, but the word is impaired that we're looking for, that most people don't like to use the term impaired. Now, I say that tongue-in-cheek because I have a very close friend whose daughter has albinism and it has caused, well, often albinism affects the sight. And she will say vision impaired all the time to me. And so if that's the way that she references her daughter, then I'm fine to do that. But our goal in this room, and I know that you would agree, is we're trying to just go the most neutralizing, less polarizing terms that we can select until we're told otherwise. And if they say they want something different, then we'll do that. All right, let's come around here. Nobody's making eye contact. Come on, this is fun. Come on, this is fun. All right. All right, the term mental retardation has been widely replaced by this term, which is considered less offensive. Is that developmental retardation, intellectual disability, mental disability, coming around, retarded, slow, duck, duck, goose, you're it.
B, intellectual disability.
That's correct, intellectual disability. I'm gonna skip this table because they wrote the book. Okay, we're gonna come over here. And you came in, is it Matt? First name? Nick, oh, I wasn't even close. All right. So Nick comes from the police department of Mesa. And here we go. This is the correct way to describe this disability. Number 7. I'm not gonna go through all these because it's the same word. So what out of A, B, C, or D would you select?
I chose A.
Did you know A, or did you look it up, Nick? I looked it up. Look it up. You know what? That's what we don't expect you to memorize any of this content. That's why we're here. That's why it's on our website. That's why we have someone like Amy who's constantly updating it. And we have done our best to survey the other language guides that are out there and gather any information that they provide that we don't provide. And I do feel, of course, tooting our own horn, that we provide the most comprehensive list of terminology recommendations that is available right now. All right, people in the back of the bus, you don't get off. When considering what words or terms to use to describe a disability, this is almost always the best approach. A, B, C, or D, what would it be?
B.
B, yes, ask. Ask the person with the disability. That was an easy one. We need something harder. We're coming over here. All right, this word can appropriately be used to describe a condition, but should not be used to describe a person.
I didn't answer that.
Oh, she didn't answer that one. Okay, well, let's see if anybody else wants to help her out in this group. Matt?
A, abnormal.
because you can have an abnormal condition but not be an abnormal person.
Oh, he's a Cronkite student. Good answer. We'll take that. Yes, it is. It's A. People do not want to be considered or defined by terminology as abnormal. All right, and last but not least, no, you guys are presenters, all the way back here. Turn around, wave at them. These are like they're the popular people who sat at the back of the bus, way back here, right? The cool kids on the block. Which of these is the preferred term? What would you select?
We consulted with each other and decided on D.
That's right. D is the correct answer. All right, so mount these, frame them. I have 3 small children. Take a magnet and stick it on your fridge and pretend you're so proud. All right, so just to wrap up and to circle back to where we began. Again, we're not here to police. Our job is to make your job easier. The new style guide will be out shortly, so if you follow us on social media, that will be the first place you'll be aware of it. Coming up down the road, we're not going to give you an ETA you can hold us to, but we are also creating a Spanish version as well of the NCDJ guide. I hear some claps in the back. Yes? Another term that I was asked to cover briefly before we take a break is deaf. So go ahead, take out your books. Oh, and I see Kristen. Yes. Mm-hmm. So if you didn't hear, Kristen, online is ncdj.org has this right now. Please know that don't just walk by and throw these in the trash thinking, oh, it's going to be outdated in a week. A lot of what is in here is still very relevant and will cross over to the new style guide, but Amy has gone to great lengths to provide you with more information than what is here and to delve into the history and the context of, again, going back to what is the conversation now. All right, so open it up to D, and let's just talk about deaf, the term deaf. And this is the best way to word it, so we'll go ahead and just read it here, which is, when do we use a lowercase d versus a capital D? The capital D is usually used when we're talking about the community. So if we're talking about a group of people who identify as being deaf, the deaf community receives a capital D. If we are talking about usually an individual, then we often will say, we can say someone who is deaf if we're using people first. And then you could ask them. But it's the community as a group that has used the capital D for their terminology, for their, Amy, do you know why exactly they have selected to have a capital D? Is there context? Amy or Abby, can you shed some light? Because I am not honestly real familiar onto why specifically capitalizing it other than adding more power to that term.
Well, my understanding is deaf, big D, is similar to I have brown hair, brown eyes, so it is who I am. It is not a condition. I'm so little d describes the loss of hearing, but I was born deaf, so I think there's that distinction. But even within the deaf community, there's some debate about big D, little d. So the reason I had asked the question is I think this is one of the terms that it is best to ask the question how the individual would define that for themselves, whether it's big D or little d. And hard of hearing is typically the general term that is used, and that's also can be uppercase or lowercase depending on how they describe it themselves. Does Amy have something else?
Yeah, the community. Again, it just kills me as a journalist to come up and not to be able to say, this is how you do it. And if you don't do it this way, we're going to take off points, or your editor's going to have a big red line through it. It is a fluid conversation, and that poses a challenge. But that does not negate our responsibilities to do our job correctly, which is to have and make decisions that are inclusive, that are fair, that show that we've done our research. And if we have done that, then you can send your work out to the public feeling like, I've done my job, the best to my abilities. Any other questions about terminology that I can answer? Yes.
Microphone. Hi. I had a question about direct quotes, because if we're trying to use, this actually just came up in a story this week, is someone was directly quoted as referring to another person as a quadriplegic, and I know that that wouldn't be person first, but how would you handle that in direct quote?
Okay, I'm going to do this just because it is the perfect segue. Do you mind if I don't answer this? Not because I don't want to, because we are going to practice that with some handouts, with some press releases, and some actual scripts that deal with that very case of working with quotes and how we handle those. So I will deflect to Sarah momentarily and transition. Anything else? And we'll go ahead. Yes.
So I have a question is for people or individuals who uses the communication device to communicate. Well, we always mention nonverbal, but but they're verbal. Well, I don't know how we should use that, because they do communicate, but they just use the communication device. But they just, yeah, they do. Yeah.
Again, I guess we're ready. I think I did a good job with mine because this is coming up later too. So I am going to just leave you all hanging because I don't want you to leave. I want you to stay the whole day. So if you attend one of the last sessions, it's Disability Reporting 101, and they will address what do you do when you need to interview someone who is nonverbal. And you need to ask these questions to get it right. How do you address that? So Jennifer right there, look at her, that's Jennifer over there. That's going to be your lady, so don't let her off the hook because it's coming up. I don't want to give away any of those answers. All right, thank you so much. I appreciate your time. I appreciate you taking a quiz as an adult. That's probably been years since you've been given a quiz. Go ahead and please grab some snacks, take a bathroom break, and then come back because we're going to go ahead and do some small groups, some interactive work, get your brains working before lunch. So thanks so much, you guys.